I don't know. I kind of feel like I've been sort of digging back into some old work, but old music work. And I gotta tell you, like that's where I used to have. I mean, I would lose hours and hours to just creating stuff with the various like programs, GarageBand or Fruity Loops or any of these things way back around the turn of the century up until like I would say maybe a couple years after I came to New York when I was just like I just don't have the time. And let's be honest, I don't want to have to find three other people that would want to go on stage and put these things, perform these things.
Right.
And so much like you were talking about how you were sort of digging back and digging in the crates, so to speak. It's just sort of like, oh yeah, I like this. Ooh, I don't like that. Ooh, this is nice. Oh, that's not.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, you've said it, and I am finally starting to follow up on that, which is be kind to your former self. Because I
Yeah,
really was
yeah,
merciless to the point where I mean, seemed to have created an entire narrative that was not really true, but because I was so, I guess, disenchanted with the fact that I didn't just wake up, perfect, and
yeah,
and just kind of told that story to myself over and over and over again. That now I'm the villain, of 25, 30 years ago. And it's actually been
yeah,
going backward and trying to really be critical dispassionately, looking at my former self and go, well, yeah,
yeah,
you were certainly a jerk because you were going through some stuff. And all right, we get that. But, when you weren't being a jerk, you were actually a pretty nice guy and your writing is not nearly as bad as you thought it was. So maybe you
yeah.
can like pick it up and do it again. So anyway, I've been doing the same thing, but on the writing side, I've been digging back into my old work and, I'm of two minds here. And the mind that's winning right now is I don't want to rehabilitate old work because it's almost like you
Yeah.
find the pyramids at Giza and you're like, that could use a touch up, like, no, that's it.
Yeah.
That's,
This would make a nice Pizza Hut.
right. Exactly. It's just, hey man, it is what it is. And we can all stare at it and wish it were complete, but it is what it is. But there is
Yeah.
one story that I actually went back into, the second arc. I went back into it and really started to work on it. So I'm actually in the process of reimagining that. And it was funny to me that just recently I realized why Biddy Wilson is dunking an alarm clock into the ocean. Because it was just one of those
Hmm.
kind of, how when you pick a specific detail and it feels right, but you have no idea why. And so you're like, well,
Yeah.
yeah, it's definitely an alarm clock. I don't know why. We'll figure it out later. Well, it just came to me. I'm not going to blow it because it's actually part of the story, but I was really happy that I discovered why. And it's not even like I figured it out, right? I used to say, well, let me figure out what this means. No, it really more reveals itself to you almost like an archaeologist where you're kind of excavating and eventually you
Hmm.
kind of unearth enough and you take out your toothbrush and you brush the dirt away and then you're like, oh, this is the shape of the fossil. And it was almost like that. And
Yeah.
it was one of those moments where I'm like, well, that's very clever, but I don't even know if I can take credit for that because I chose that detail without any understanding of why I did it, but it felt right. So I left it, but I had no clue. And then here, 27 years or whatever it is, years later, I unearth the reason that I chose it. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's pretty clever.
Yeah.
Can't take credit for it, but that's pretty
Yeah.
clever.
Yeah. There's two things about that. Number one, talking about being an archaeologist, I remember something, I believe it was John Frusciante, and I might have even said this. Gosh, we've had so many seasons now, Art. I don't remember what I've said before on this podcast. But you, as a listener, can go and listen to all of our seasons one at a time and tell me if I have. But John Frusciante, who is a guitar player for Red Hot Chili Peppers, once said that it's sort of like you have a giant slab of marble and you're using your guitar to sort of chip away until the idea finally reveals itself within. And I always like that metaphor that he used, mainly because I never thought anybody from the Red Hot Chili Peppers could actually come up with a metaphor. Hashtag Mr. Bungle. Anyway, the other thing about that is, what you say about finding this detail that you created so long ago that felt right. And then, here you are maybe at this point in your life later on thinking, oh, I think I get it. It took me a long time to realize that my own work can be like work that I see in popular culture, where there might be a movie that I've seen as a kid that I don't get. And then it's not until later, until I get older, that I realize, oh, I get it now. Like I remember Once in a Lifetime by Talking Heads, and I, listened to it when it came out. Of course, it was on the radio. It was a huge hit for the Talking Heads in the 80s, and it was just always kind of like a fun song to sing along to. And it wasn't until I turned, I think it was like 25, somewhere around the turn of the century, where I heard that song and I got it. And I had like, I think it was my first existential drama of my life. So I think the same can be said of our work. We have, we sort of make jokes and we make light, or we talk about it, about sort of going back to our old things and being like, oh boy, who is this person? But there is stuff there. And I think that it's worth evaluating and maybe saying, I never got this to work. Why didn't I get it to work? Aha. Because in a way, you're just editing a piece, but instead of putting it on the shelf for like a couple months or a week or a couple days or even a year, you've given it a lot of time to marinate. And I love what I've read from you of the second arc. And I feel like, wow, this is some stuff that I really want to read more of. And so I hope that continues.
Yeah, thanks. So I think what I found so revealing about reading the old version is that there were parts of it that glowed and parts of it that just sank like a stone. And as a person, had been removed from it for a while, it became very obvious. The parts that work are the parts that are tethered to your actual experience, either based on a person you knew or sort of loosely, pulling from your own life or whatever, but they're tethered to reality in some way. And the parts that did not work, and there were plenty of parts that did not work, were things that you basically created whole cloth as allegory or whatever. And it was there almost like a connective tissue between the events from my own experience. And it was just so obvious that part of it was real and part of it was fake. And so I'm like, well, you got to remove the fake stuff because it's pulling the whole thing down. So I did that. And again, that's the way I used to edit, is I'd remove everything I didn't want. I'd see what I had left and I'd try to fashion something out of it. And there's some value to that if you think about it. I can't remember the name of the artistic style, but what is that? That Japanese bowl that gets stitched back together with gold. What the hell is that thing called?
Oh, yeah, they did it with the whole Kylo Ren and the Star War. I know the term that you're thinking about.
Kintsugi, golden repair. Well, that's just,
yep.
That's just beautiful. The idea of golden repair. I love that.
Yeah.
But anyway,
everything that I've sort of repaired in my life has kind of been done with a little bit of like expired glue. So yes, golden repair is much better.
I think American kintsugi would be with duct tape, right? I think that's pretty much what we're looking at.
Yes.
Yeah. But but the idea that you have this, these fragments, these shards that need to be put back together, and that you do it with gold. It's just such a beautiful, culturally, just a beautiful sentiment. But anyway, I'm just looking at the story going, it's not really something I need to put back together. It's not like a pot that broke and I can kind of fit the pieces back together and poof, I have a pot again. I'm missing whole sections of this structure. And if I approach filling those in with the same energy and honesty that I had accidentally stumbled on, many, many years ago, writing these pieces of this story that actually worked, then maybe the whole thing will work. And the act of writing it has been very, I've been afraid the entire time I've been doing it. It's been like exploring your closet when there's no lights on and you're not sure if there's something in there that's going to attack you. And it's felt like that. And I think that's why it's taken me so long to actually get to a finish line. But the thing I want to kind of share with you and everybody else who's listening is that the old way that I used to do it really relied on me. And by the way, I'm now telling myself this is garbage, so I don't want to encourage people to do this. But the old way I used to do it was I felt like I really had to understand, the ending and where it was going. And I had to have like the framework and the structure and all this other stuff. And that I was just sort of not transcribing, but I was just kind of filling in the pieces because I already knew everything that was going on. And those didn't work because they were not exciting. It was just plywood, so the stuff where I'm searching and not really sure what's going on, that's where it's alive and it crackles. So I think there's something to that. Not everybody's the same. Some people need the plotter and pantser kind of approaches. It appears that I'm much more pantser than I thought I was, because when I just sit down and have a vague notion of what I'm searching for, the stuff that comes out is a lot better than if I have this whole framework and sit down. It's almost like, oh, well, I already have the framework. I don't really want to do this anymore because there's nothing left to discover. Yeah. So where do you fall in that whole plotter and pantser kind of arena?
I'm totally a pantser. And just to reiterate, for some folks, we're talking about someone that plans everything out or just kind of does it by the seat of their pants. Is that how you would define it?
Yeah, and we know it's a range. Like, I don't think anybody would say that they're firmly one side or the other all the time. But I certainly lean towards just sort of sitting down and going. I might have one idea that I'm trying to tease out. And I think that's why when we did our novel exercises, a couple years ago, whenever that was, that I think is why it didn't work for me, because I wasn't allowing myself enough freedom to just explore. I felt like I had to have a framework, a structure of the plot. And, I'd get 7 scenes in and then the whole thing would just fizzle because I wasn't really interested in what I was doing anymore. So anyway, yes, that's what I mean.
Yeah. One of the things for me, well, first off, I should say I am a pantser. In the longer pieces that I've written, and I guess, we could call those novels. I'm still a little bit shy to call it that, #imposter syndrome. But like The Record Store, my piece called Iordanos, I have that weird thing that I wrote. And then there's another one that I wrote after that, 3 space novels and a record store novel. All of those were by the seat of my pants, where I found a first line, it came to my head. I know that the last of those 4 that I just mentioned, the line came to my head while I was waiting for a train in the subway in New York City. And I just, by the seat of my pants, all of that stuff. And I have always been a horrible plotter. And I think that for me, it just goes into so many places in my life where I love the element of, in narrative improv, we talk about play, and as we get older, we're sort of taught that we can't have as much play, that we have to be adults, that we have to go to work, that we have to do these things. And so it's very difficult for us to connect with that idea of play. And that's what I love most about it, is I feel happiest in first drafts of things because I'm allowing myself to just run rampant. And so for the purposes of here, pantsing, by the seat of my pants, I'm having play, I'm having a lot of fun. And for me, when I had to add that structure to make it something that was good in subsequent drafts, that's where I was like, I had so much fun doing this, and now I got to make it so that people can read it.
Right.
Always in love with my idea, but I'm finding that I'm having a lot more fun in the editing process if I start to try and apply that play. And again, everybody has their own thing. Everybody has their own way that they're finding, and I'm finding it for myself. These past 2 weeks, I've found myself in a strange situation where I have time in the morning to read my piece that I'm working on aloud. I have about two pieces that I'm working on right now. And it's been so beneficial. I love reading pieces aloud, but now I pretend that I'm at a reading. And so that helps me step up to the mic, or in the purposes of where I really am, I'm in my space that I'm doing my editing on. Reading it aloud for me and acting as if I'm performing it for an audience is very, very helpful. And I think that from my performing background of doing, monologues and acting and reading so many plays, I can catch in real time where something doesn't feel right. And that's what I need to catch more of, are those times where that doesn't make sense, or this character needs to have something else to to show that. To make all of these small edits while I'm reading it aloud, it's been really, really great. So that for me is that element of play, or kind of going by the seat of my pants, because I sometimes feel that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, to me, I have such a stodgy vision of plotting it out. And it's so silly for me to say this, to think this, that it's like, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to outline my story, and I'm going to do it completely sober, and I'm not going to have any noise, and all the distractions are gone, and I'm going to ABC, 1, 2, 3. And it's not that, and I understand that, but for me, I'm trying to find my own way into that outlining, into sort of like,
Yeah.
plotting things out. So yeah, I'm a pantser, total pantser.
What's funny, I mean, some of the strength of your work is your voice, and so that makes total sense that you would sit there and sort of perform it over and over and over again until it is honed as a performance. The voice, it really is one of the main strengths of your work, which is fantastic. I do the same thing in a way, but I have the computer read it to me because I don't want to perform it. I feel like if I no, but seriously, I feel if I performed my work, then I'm not talking about you, I'm just talking about me, that I would compensate for the flaws in the text through performing. And that's what I'm afraid of, is that I don't want to gloss over something that maybe isn't working unless you say it just right. And then like, oh, well, with this intonation, it makes sense, But the computer can't do that. The computer just reads it. And now that and that wasn't available to us 20 years ago, really. But the avatars now are so lifelike. They're really pretty good. Even the ones that kind of drone a little bit, they will trip up. And it's humbling when the computer read something that you think is fantastic and it just is not pleasing to the ear at all. And you're like, well, nope, got to fix that. But then the beauty is you just press pause, you go fix it, and then you have it read it again. And that's actually a trick that I use for the refill episodes. I like to hear the computer read the refill episodes. And once the computer can do it, if the computer can do it, I can do it. And that's pretty much how I do it. But no, I think that's a great process. I really like what you're doing and my version of what you're doing. I think we're in the same area. So we're both pantsers, and we both like to make sure that the work is pleasing to the ear before we let people look at it with their eyes. That's good.
Yeah. And it has two unintended consequences for myself. Number one, I hear you, heard Chef so much about that. I don't want to make it to where the only person, you have to hear me read it to get it. Because I got to be honest with you, when I do that, when I am reading aloud and I am sort of thinking of it as sort of a monologue, as something I'm doing it live, boy, I add so many italicized words and phrases. I'm like, I can't do that. Number one, because that is trying to lead the reader into how to read it, and it should stand on its own without trying to inflect too much. And secondly, because, and this is for some folks out there that like submitting, there are places that you will submit to where you have to copy and paste your work into a field and it doesn't translate the italics. So I'm like, oh, I can't get too much into that because, I don't want to spend 10 hours correcting a piece in a field because it doesn't read italics. So that's one of the things. But the other thing that's helping me with that is I know that I have bemoaned so much in this podcast. And again, listener, you can go and listen to all 3 seasons to find out where I did. There are lit mags that I have talked about and that I want to be a part of so bad. When I read a piece on these lit mags, I'm like, oh, I wish I could write like that. But when I'm reading my own work aloud and I'm like, oh, you know what I'd like? I'd like to put this here. It's telling me the writer that I am and not the writer that I wish I was. And that's really important for my headspace because I so hard want to be one of these sort of like prose poetry geniuses that write something in 52 words and it just speaks volumes. This has been something that I've wanted to be since I first found Kafka and his Blue Octavo notebooks back. Octavo? No. Kafka's work back in college. But maybe I'm just not that writer. And I have beaten myself up so much for not being that writer because I want to be. But when I read the work aloud for myself, I am gaining so much confidence because I'm like, wait a minute, I like this. This is kind of stupid.
Yeah.
I really like it. So it's really, really helping me. So I think in a more general picture, you know, a long time ago, a very, very close friend of mine who I may or may not be co-hosting a podcast with in 2024 once told me, you don't have to ascribe to any religion's 100% tenets. I think I was going through a Zen phase. You can take pieces of philosophies that work for you to make your own way. And I think that that's something that is very difficult, but also very freeing once you start tuning into it, is the different ways that people work and how that might work into your own workflow to develop yourself. And I think that that's been very, very important for me to kind of start to recognize where I work best.
Yeah.
And not work best, but work best for me to make me feel like I'm doing something of value.
Yeah, I mean, and it's the old cliche, right? Everybody's different, and no one process is perfect, et cetera, et cetera. But we really do push that hard. Like, for anybody who's listening, we are not here telling you exactly how to do this work. What we're doing is sharing what works for us and what doesn't work for us, so that you can play with it. I have always been very suspicious of any. I mean, now there's tons of podcasts that do this, but any sort of model that says this is the way to accomplish this task. The Sid Field's 3-act structure for screenwriting is the only way to make a movie. Well, we know that's not right, but it's a perfectly good way to make a particular kind of movie. And there are plenty of examples where it works great. So that's, to me, it's like, use the tool that makes the job easier. If I'm going to scoop ice cream, damn it, go get me an ice cream scooper out of the drawer. Don't get me a butter knife. Don't get me a fork. But if I'm going to eat steak, I'd like a fork instead of an ice cream scooper. Yeah. So if we just extrapolate this, it becomes very simple. Like, oh yeah, we follow these principles in our daily lives, that we get the right tool for the right job. If I'm going to hammer something, please get me a hammer. So like, okay, great. So we recognize that we have all these tools. Well, then it's our job to be the mechanic, to be the handyman, and know what tool is best for each job. So if you want to be lyrical, and I think we both want to be lyrical in our work, especially the microfiction that you do and the short stories that I'm trying to do are so brief that if they weren't lyrical, they'd be almost, the kind of straightforward realism that you get out of a newspaper article, which can be interesting. I'm not knocking that. To do fiction in the style of a newspaper article might be exactly what you need for a particular piece, especially if you're doing something like retelling the Baby Jessica story, the baby that fell in that well. If you do a version of that and you're trying to get at something that's other than the fear of the mother and the emotionality of the moment, if you're just trying to report out something, and that could be a really nice juxtaposition where you have something that's intensely emotional, but you're telling in a way that isn't. So, use the tool that's best. There's one thing that I've always said that has been a little false, and I'm going to say it again and acknowledge the falsehood in it. I hate slam poetry. And even as I say that, I'm admitting that's a little false. I don't hate all slam poetry. I hate bad slam poetry with a passion, because, and I think it's because it feels so artificial, where you have these people who are using an intonation, and I wish I could do it. I'm not very good at making fun of it. And I don't want to make fun of it because I've seen some that's really good. So I don't want to belittle that art form. But there's so much of it where if you just kind of adopt the cadence, it doesn't even matter what you're saying. It sounds like slam poetry, but it isn't having the emotional resonance or the impact on your heart or your lungs. It doesn't hit you in a way that makes you want to laugh, cry, get outraged, because I think that's kind of the point of slam poetry. It's really trying to make you feel sorry for the poet is what I've noticed. Like the ones that really work, you're like, oh shit, man, you've had a hard life. But the ones that don't work for me are the ones where people stand up and try to kind of drop knowledge or drop wisdom on the audience. And I'm like, fuck
Yeah.
you, kid. Like, come on, man. You know,
No.
just, but anyway, I don't know how I got onto slam poetry here, but I'm very passionate about that particular point of view, is that I hate bad slam poetry. It's just so pretentious and worthless. But the good stuff, I've seen some really good spoken word poetry that cuts to that person's experience, and it's expressing it in an unvarnished, raw, emotional way that really gets you to empathize with the speaker, and that is so powerful, and I love that. So I think I would like to move my writing more in that direction without being maudlin or sappy. So anyway, yeah, that's kind of where I'm coming from. I don't know how the hell we got here, Tim. I'm sorry. I took the oar and I'm like, let's go to slam poetry. It's like, oh, jeez. Okay.
It's all right. We all have our things. I can't stand Oasis. I don't even understand it. You want to go try and buy tickets for Oasis? You spent 17 days trying to get tickets to Oasis, and those concerts, by the way, are in 2025. Do you know how many times Oasis is going to break up between now and that concert you want to go to?
Yeah, you hate it.
What do you want to go for?
Right. You hate Oasis. Oasis hates Oasis, right?
Just go listen to Blur and save yourself all the trouble of listening to Oasis. This is the way to generate interaction with the listening audience, is to just sort of give our unabashed opinions about things like Oasis and slam poetry.
Oh, absolutely. All the relevant topics. Yeah.
One of my favorite things to do is to see bands in the studio. I love to see bands hashing it out, working it out, taking this 17th take, of looking tired in the room with the soundboard where they're just listening to this take over and over and over again. I love seeing that workflow. And we've talked a little bit about it here, but this is the kind of thing, to be honest, I'm not trying to blow smoke up our own proverbial tuchuses, but I would love to hear this and then go and be like, oh, is that what they're doing? What am I doing? And I think sometimes if you could just take a step back and look at how your workflow is and try to assess what's working for me, what doesn't. And it could be so frustrating because, for me, I want to just write. I want to get something out there. I want, as we've talked about before with me, I want the validation of getting an acceptance. So I want to have that work finished. And I don't take enough time to look at how I'm getting there. And so these kind of conversations really excite me because I want to step away from them and go, okay, that's what Art does. That's what Tim does. What do I do? And so I really think it's about taking a step back, looking at the workflow and saying, wait a minute, I do not like writing at this table, or what you need. What is it that really sort of, it's about tuning into yourself, about really trying to listen to that voice that's throwing up a red flag or throwing up a green flag. And so these sorts of conversations to me remind me of watching bands and how they work in the studio. And it just gets me so excited to kind of take a look at my own workflow and evaluate it and take a step back and say, what's going on here? Can I make it any better? Can I make it any worse? Can I make it more challenging for myself? There's so many options.
Yeah, and I think what I'm going to take out of this particular conversation is when I go back to complete the second arc, I'm going to approach it as that kind of what if creative point of view. And one of the things I've noticed is whenever I go back in and I read what I have, I like what I have, but I feel like, is everything in the right place? And I start to almost move things around like puzzle pieces because my work tends to bounce around. And so you can actually rearrange it and it doesn't suffer if you rearrange it sometimes. So finding the right order of the things that are there might actually open up an opportunity to see a new gap that needs to be filled. Yeah. So I like to really play with, what comes when. So it's really about, do I have all the pieces in place to do that golden repair that kintsugi on this piece?